Music.
Hi everyone. It's 5:31. We are going to do a quick do now right now for the next, let's say, 1 minute. Requesting everyone in the chat box to please type where you're currently joining from and what is your current role. So for the next 1 minute, let's put all of those information in the chat box. Where are you joining us from now and what is the current role that you're going to play? And I'm going to play music for the next 1 minute. We'll just do that in the chat.
I've come a long way riding my cycle just to say how lovely you are. I had to say it without a doubt, 'cause with that smile you took my heart. Yellow paper daisy, you've made me crazy lately. My heart's been so racy. Maybe I'm falling in love again. I'm falling in love again. I'm falling in love again. I'm falling in love.
Thank you so much, everyone. We have the chat box buzzing with a lot of information, and we have a lot of educators joining from across the country. We can see Bangalore, South, West Bengal, Pune, Delhi, different parts of India. And that's the beauty of this online space, too. Webinars where we get to meet educators from different parts of our country. And we have 150 participants here. That's like a big, big, big thank you to everybody who joined here today. With that, we're going to move ahead with the webinar today. Give me 1 second as I share my screen. So, Welcome to this webinar on using data to simplify classroom decisions. This is from 5:30 to 7:30, and a lot of you have joined us on this call on Zoom. This is also available on YouTube. If any of your peers, any other teachers, educators want to join this space, but they find YouTube more comfortable, they can use YouTube to join this space. Yeah. And couple of things about Zoom. You might already be knowing this, but this is to ensure that we have a smooth experience and you are able to access all the features. One, the mic button. We request everyone to keep the mic on mute so that we can hear the speaker very clearly without any disturbance. If you want to share something, definitely unmute and please share. You can also raise hand so that we know who is going to speak next. There's a video button. If your bandwidth allows you to keep the video on, that would be amazing. Like we can see you, we can hear you clearly, because an online space will be interesting for the facilitator also. But if you have challenge with bandwidth, we understand. And the chat box, any questions that you have, or if you have any thought that's very interesting, please use the chat box to type it in. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible in the chat box itself. And again, this is a community of learning, right? All like a lot of educators are here. If you know the answer to any of the question, requesting you also to respond and think of this as a community learning space. With that, very, very happy and proud to welcome Prasanna Sundaram here, who is our speaker today. He's the founder of Augmented Understanding. He's going to be taking this session on understanding data and how we can use that to simplify decision making in the classrooms. I'll give a very brief introduction about Prasanna. I'm sure that's not enough, but I hope he'll also take us through his journey till now. He's a data science and human development enthusiast with more than 18 years of experience in different roles, where they've used data to make decisions. He led data analytics workshops for several schools, educators, organizations, besides a host of CXO level audiences in corporates. He's also a Teach for India alumni. He's trained more than 2,000 plus educators from schools, universities, organizations for different sizes, different batches of educators. Earlier, he has nearly 10 years of experience with Genpact IRI, an early mover in the data analytics space, working and training global audiences in the US consumer goods industry, supporting thought leadership in the company, including the White House project in the US. A very warm welcome to you, Prasanna. I've seen the amount of work you've put in to prepare for this, the quality of the content. Thank you so much for spending time in talking to our audience and taking us through this. A couple of norms for this space. We request everyone to keep the camera on if possible, if your bandwidth allows, for effective interaction. Keep the mic off if you're not speaking so that we can hear the speaker very clearly. And any questions that you have, please ensure that you use the chat box to ask any of those, and request you to participate enthusiastically through this space. There's going to be a lot of questions, a lot of activities for you to do. Request you to participate actively. With that, happy to hand it over to Prasanna. Over to you. Very happy to be in this space.
Thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. I think that was a very elaborate introduction. Thank you so much to everybody who's a part of this webinar today. A very warm good evening to each of us. It's wonderful to be in this room with such an illustrious partners of schools as such. Just give me a quick thumbs up if everybody's able to hear me. If you're able to just get a perfect. Thank you so much. Also, throughout the session, I'm going to be sharing my screen. There will be some bits of things that we'll talk about. There'll be certain bits that we'll try to just do freehand activities as such. So in the space, I'm going to be sharing my screen. In case you see that my screen is not shared, just give me a little thumbs up and we'll just make sure that we have it covered. All right. So with that, I'll start for the day. We have quite a bit of things that we want to talk about. Let me know if everybody's able to see my screen. Just give me if somebody can just give me a quick yes, please.
Yes.
Thank you. So welcome to data analysis for educators. Once again, using data for simplifying classroom decisions. There's a lot of talk around using data in classrooms. There's a whole space about thinking with data as such. But today's session, what we're going to do is we're going to start just simply spending some time demystifying the space for ourselves. Like instead of just talking of data at large, obviously, when you talk about data, sky's the limit of how many things you can do with it. But let's take that next 2 hours that we are meeting for the first time to just simplify this process for us, demystify this idea of what is data. So today's session is just going to be called as Saral Sankhya, that is data and you, just us, what we do with data. The audience is obviously we have a whole set of teachers, we have a few people from NGOs, we have other education stakeholders. We're going to be going over for the next about 2 hours. I'll try to minimize the time of what we talk and get into a lot more hands-on activity. But about 2 hours, we're going to be doing through a bunch of things that we do together. But let's be very clear, the purpose of this session, the program, whatever we talk about, is not to help you teach better. We don't even dare to think that we know anything better than you do in teaching. You are clearly the bosses there. The purpose of the session, the program, the workshop is to get you more comfortable with certain tools and techniques, certain frameworks that makes it easy for you to plan, that allows you to make easier decisions, and finally communicate. That you're able to structure your information in a way that your time is spent on working with your students and not with just operational elements of sorts, right? And that's the whole way which the whole program or the workshop, the evening is designed. How we started this journey is to think about it. It said that an average teacher makes about 1,500 plus decisions in a day. And that's coming out of 30 students, 60 parents, 3 subjects, 3 terms, classwork, homework, leadership, participation. The wealth of information that a teacher is working with is extremely high. Yet at the same time, it causes a lot of fatigue. It causes a lot of inefficiency in how you process information. With the best of efforts, you're trying to chase things down, than have a system that allows you to be reflective on it, right? 1,500 decisions a day just about classrooms. And we've been in this space for the last about 10 years now. We started off with the Teach for India Fellowship. Then we started off with a small edtech tool to just understand assessments as such. Then we also moved on to doing some monitoring and evaluation for organizations and schools. For us, the key always is that as teachers, most of you will always have solutions for your classrooms. You understand your classrooms, you understand your context. The challenge lies in how do you navigate through information? How do you navigate through the time that's given to you to process all of it? And that's how eventually came up with a teacher workshop, where we understand the decision-making power has to be with you. That if you are able to work with your classroom data, you are able to make your life easier with it, then you automatically start moving towards smarter decisions. In these 10 years, we've noticed this is exactly how we saw the landscape. An average teacher is somebody like a sprinter who's ready to do that long run of a marathon. They are ready to go do the run. They already are collecting a lot of data in their classroom. There is a lot of attendance records, there is scores, there is grading, but rarely do we get to use them as effectively as we can. Then came in the products, the MISs, the trackers. There are multiple things that go on. But when you give them a scooter, if you don't really help in understanding how to use it, it ends up creating more chores to people than ending up using it, right? Just because data is available doesn't mean that everybody is using it, because they're not adept at using it. It's not exactly walked through how to put it in use. Once teachers know how to use it, then the journey becomes a lot more simpler. As you start demanding more from your MIS, as you start demanding more from your trainings, as you start demanding, you start reflective practices from your classroom, it starts getting easier for you to know what you're asking for. Collaborations get a lot more easier. And that's the idea with which this whole workshop was designed. That how do you help teachers understand classroom data for smoother decision making? So once again, the idea, the purpose is to help you with tools and techniques that make your planning, your decisions, your communication easier. And that's how the whole process is going to be. Today's objective is straight. We're going to do only 2 simple things. We're going to simplify the idea of looking at data. What is data? How do we simplify that idea of looking at data? And we just do some simple communication using data in hand. There's going to be a bunch of activities that we do, which is going to be freehand. Then we'll also move into using some of the data tools. But broadly, these are the only 2 things that we're going to be doing. There's a golden rule that says, tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. Does anyone know who's made this quote? Whose quote is this? Can someone just help me whose quote is this?
I may be wrong, but it's Confucius.
So that's the beauty of this quote. This quote can just be attributed to so many people. I've read this as Benjamin Franklin. Somebody said it as Confucius. But the idea is, Swami Vivekananda, interesting. So we're getting some answers here. But the idea again is, let's make sure that we keep this communicative. There will be spaces where I will be leading some questions. I would love to hear your views, your voices. Use the chat box abundantly to give your opinions. There will be spaces where we may have to do certain things, by ourselves. At that point, probably the speaking might be minimized, but please make sure that we talk about things as much as we can. All right. So with that, I'm going to start our first conversation. There's going to be a 4-part to this. We're going to be analyzing data in everyday life, do a little hands-on activity, get into tools, and finally open up for questions. But let's start with a simple question. When someone sees the word data, what is the first thing that comes into your mind? What is data? Can I have the chat boxes? Can I have some voices from the room, please? What comes into your mind when someone says the word data? What are the first few things that comes into your mind? Numbers, great. I see a whole bunch of numbers here.
Can I say?
Yes, please. Lots of information, yeah.
It's a combination of information, numbers, and also the current reality.
Okay, can you describe that a little more?
So basically, I'm teaching in a class. So when we see the data, I have an idea of what the class looks like, what the current reality of the students is, and I can see the past, and we can build forward our present and future from that.
Very interesting. Okay. So we are able to get to an idea that everybody is talking about numbers, everybody is talking about information. There's also a little talk about how we can use them. Yes, Shrita, you would like to add something to this?
So for me, it's only half of what exactly I can get from the classroom. It is maybe only like what we can measure. There are things that we cannot measure from a classroom. So,
Okay.
So data provides only that part of it.
Interesting. Okay. So we have some thoughts about data. Okay, fine. So what is data-driven decision making? So what do you think is data-driven
It's,
decision making?
May I say?
Go for
When
it,
you make
please.
inferences based on analysis of data.
When you make decisions made
Data
on,
data tells you exactly what your next step is supposed to be. That's data-driven decision making.
okay, interesting. I see a lot of
Yeah.
chats also. Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to add that data is anything that is visible. And when you say data-driven decision, is that based on what is visible, you are going to take an action. Yeah.
Very interesting. So you have a bunch of information laid in front of you. You're basically trying to build decision based on that.
So it
And
is
what-
something which we validate what we are observing. It is a
Interesting.
validation. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I also see a lot of messages that says drawing conclusions, processing of information, measurable. Interesting, very nice. So then comes my third question. How often do you, or where do you use this decision-making process? Where do you use data-driven decisions? Where all do you see yourself doing this idea of using data-driven decisions?
Hello.
Hello.
Can I go?
Yes, please. Go for it, Sanjay sir.
Yes, this is regarding mostly for the planning and execution, where we can start a project or going for any new activity in the class, or even planning ahead of the class before you come to the class also.
Interesting. Okay.
It's,
Maybe
what
when
I
things go wrong.
Go for it.
Yeah, when things are not going as per planning.
Yeah.
When things are going wrong, that is when you go back to the data and see why it is going wrong.
Very interesting. I also see something that says assessments, surveys, opinion polls. Okay. So a lot of thoughts around how do we put data-driven decisions into classroom? How do we build strategy on it? Last question before I move on to the next bit, which is, how do you feel when someone says the word data or data-driven decisions? What's the first feeling that you get? We know the answers, but I just want you to help me understand the feeling that you get. Thank you, Ms.
Collecting a lot of data from the people.
Okay. Someone says scared. There is something that says intimidating. Very interesting. Anyone else? Mess. Painful to collect. Complex. Any more? Informed decisions. Collection of arbitrary numbers. Okay. Interesting. Great. So we've had a bunch of thoughts. We have had a bunch of questions, bunch of ideas here. Now comes my next question. It's about 5:45. How many of you like to have a cup of tea?
Definitely, everybody would like to have. No.
How many of you like a cup of tea? How many of you enjoy a cup of tea? Can I get a quick thumbs up or a little space? And how many of you know how to make a cup of tea? Okay, thank you. Yes, Manas, you would like to say something?
No, I know how to make tea.
Can someone help me with the idea? How do you make a cup of tea? Can someone just break it down for me? Suddenly we've stepped out all the way. We're going to step out a bit and then we're going to come back in. What goes into making a cup of tea, please?
I'll go.
Go for it.
You put water on the gas. Yeah, you
Okay.
switch on the gas. You put water on it. You put chai, sugar, all of your masalas, and then it is boiling. You put milk, and then you let it boil till it reduces a little bit in amount, and then your chai is ready.
Very interesting. And I see a whole bunch of messages as well. It says sugar, coffee, water, milk, coffee, water, milk, tea powder. Interesting. Anyone with a different idea? Go for it, Mr. Noor.
Me,
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I speak in Hindi, first of all.
This session is going to be done in English. I'm sorry, Mr. Noor, but I'll be happy to do one more with you in Hindi sometime as well.
Okay. Okay, not an issue. So what you asked before that, what is the data and what is the data-driven decision making? So the answer is here. When we make tea, we use sugar, water, and milk. All those things. All these things are data, and we can say that a tea is a data-driven product. So this is what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Noor. Exactly. So if that's perfectly exactly where we are going with this to start with. I have a set of things showing up on my screen. It says water, tea leaves, milk, sugar. Somewhere we say ginger, somewhere we say cardamom. Is that more or less what everybody uses to make your cup of tea? Is that sounding correct? Okay. Now my question is, do we use the exact same quantity of all of them, or we use different measurements to it? Can I get some voices, please? Do we use exactly the same measurement of each of them?
No, different measurement.
How different? Can someone just talk me through a few different measurements?
It differs to people to people.
Sorry?
A tea making is differs to people, and it is also different from area to area.
Correct. So I'm going to come to that in a bit. Let's talk about 1 cup of tea here. Do we think this is more or less what goes into a cup of tea? These are the standard ingredients that go in? But
Yes.
as we make a cup of tea, we are using, say, half a cup water, we use half a cup milk, we use 1 teaspoon of tea leaves. Mentally, we are making these calculations on a regular basis. Recurringly, as people, we are tuned to making data-driven decisions. We don't even realize it. A lot of times when you think about data, we always think about it from a very work perspective, and we start making it more complicated than it needs to be. The idea is, anytime that you're working with even simple measurements, we are constantly looking at some pieces of information that says, how do I make this thing happen? When I'm making a cup of tea, I'm constantly measuring certain things to go in. Now comes my second question. There is already a lot of people who started answering it. This is a standard measurement that I've given for a cup of tea. At what point do you change the ingredients? At what point do you change the ingredients? When do you think you'll probably change your measurements as such? What are the different places where you will end up changing your measurements? There's different needs. Interesting. According to your preference, very interesting. What else?
When the number of people changes.
Number of people changes. Interesting. Okay. So if I just open this up, let's see if I can find something here. Let's say we have more than 1 person. We have 5 people there. We suddenly have 2 people who may have diabetes. We may have somebody who wants to have a preference of a Sulaimani tea. Somebody might have a black tea as such, right? Depending on the people that we are working with, depending on whom we are making the tea for, the ingredients that we choose will change. And that's a standard thing that we do. Not everything might change exactly in a 1-to-1 ratio. Probably your ginger and your cardamom might still remain, less of whatever you're using for 1 person. That may end up going for 3 people. But some of your measurements will move back and forth. We do this on a recurring basis. We do this exact activity day in, day out, multiple times a day. We just don't think that this is also part of data. Most of our decisions in life is all driven by data. Now comes my last question. When I make a cup of tea, when you're having this cup of tea, when you're making it or when you're giving it to somebody else, what is it that is non-negotiable to you? What is it that you want to make sure that this cup of tea has? How should this tea be?
Tea, chai patti.
What should be there in the tea? It should be tasty, interesting. Okay, Prashant says tasty. Uma says quality. It says relaxing, interesting. Rutuja says hot. Okay, kadak, interesting. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? No disturbance, refreshing, very good. Each time that I think about this tea, there are multiple things that go into mind. We think of probably a particular taste that we want. It has to be hot. It has to be fresh. For some of us, that quantity is extremely important thing. How much is that cup of tea that we are trying to have? That satisfaction is key to each of us. In general, every activity that we do, even when we make a cup of tea, there is something that's non-negotiable to us. There is this non-negotiableness to us, to the whole idea of the activity based on which we change things that go in, including the fact that we are looking at what is the ingredient that's going in. We also look at what time do we make that cup of tea. A lot of decisions are built based on that non-negotiable outcome that we want. The more we are able to think of an outcome, it becomes easy for us to think of, what are the things that go into making it. When you start thinking about it in a very broad, generally boring sounding business terms, these are going to be called as your variables and outcomes. When you think about something that's non-negotiable, every activity generally has an absolute outcome that you imagine. All of us, forget doing this for somebody else. When we imagine an activity, we are thinking of a specific outcome that we want, based on which we use things in our entire domain as such. There are certain things that we do on a recurring basis. Every cup of tea may end up having certain standard things that go in. That's basically your water, your tea leaves. There are standard activities that we do. And some things define your context. Again, two sets of things. There is something called variables. Variables are different things that we are working with. Some of them are standard variables, standard activities that we do. Some of them define the context in which you're putting your variables in. How do you put these ingredients? Where are you putting them in place? What is the context in which you're putting them in the order? But irrespective what the variables are, you always think of it backwards, starting from an outcome. Think that what is the outcome that I want? What is the outcome and how do I measure it? That measuring is what is called as your key performance indicators. Generally, when you hear these terms, your KPIs are nothing but that guest of your house coming and saying, this tea was very good, that I had a good time. These indicators that tell you if you're meeting your outcome, if that non-negotiable piece that you wanted is getting ticked off, that is nothing but your KPIs. Everything that you put into a cup of tea to make sure that the tea happens are a bunch of variables, right? Is that good right now? Is everybody at least somewhere on the page? We'll obviously do a whole bunch of activities here, but does that set the tone? Is everybody comfortable so far? Super, thank you, Jocelyn. Anyone else? Awesome. So let me take another quick example. Let's take another one. So we just spoke about a cup of tea. A cup of tea, once again, a cup of tea can be made with so many different ways. Every person may have their own different ways of looking at your cup of tea. But data isn't just about numbers or records or charts or graphs. It's just knowing what makes, what are the ingredients that makes your cookie as such. So each time that you do an activity, just being mindful of things that you're doing. How do you process it? What are you doing with it? A lot of information is hiding right there. The whole process of working with data is just being mindful and then tracking them around. With that, I'll take another quick example. This is a simple example again. 1 second. We just spoke about outcomes and variables, something that are non-negotiables. Variables are basically two kinds, standard and contextual. Now, I'm just going to take a second example. Let's say if I'm washing clothes. If you're washing clothes, what is that non-negotiable for you? When clothes are getting washed, what is it that's non-negotiable for you as a result that you want to see? What is it that you expect out of clean clothes, stain-free? Great. Anyone else? All of us wash clothes. What is it that we absolutely want?
It should not tear.
Sorry?
It should not tear off while washing.
It should not tear off while washing. Okay. Someone says fragrant. Someone says clean washing. It should not stink. Clean has been a recurring thing. Very nice. So the outcome that we definitely want is clean. And interestingly, I continuously see people saying fragrant, which seems to be a very important piece that everybody is talking about. There is that sense of smell that people want to talk about. Awesome. Now, when you think about washing your clothes, an activity that you do on a daily basis, what do you think are your variables that go in? What are some of the standard things that you use when you're washing your clothes? And what are some of the things that can define the context? Any thoughts, please? Water, detergent. Thank you, Sanjeevani. Water, detergent are your standard variables. Interesting. Thank you, Musharat. Water, detergent. Electricity. Interesting. Okay. Softeners. Soak in the detergent. Water, detergent, freshener. Interesting. Okay. The way you wash your clothes are variables. Thank you, Mohit. Method, time. Interesting. So someone says mixed or colors. Sangamitra, when you say it should not be mixed, when you're saying if colors and whites are not to be mixed, do you think these are standard variables? These are contextual variables. Do you think they are based out of a context that you have in mind? Or do you think they're going to be standard? And again, it doesn't have to be one or another. For each of us, it might be a little different. Context is comforter or which type of machine. Very interesting. Again, so I'm just going to open this up. Let's say outcome, clearly most of us spoke about. We need clean clothes, fresh clothes, dry, fragrance. That seems to be recurringly coming in. Variables, obviously there are certain standard things that we do. As people, we use water. We are looking at powder or soap. We are looking at a brush or a machine. Some of them will also define the context. At what time of the day are we washing the clothes? At what time of the day do I need the clothes back? If I have this session at 5:30 today, probably I would have washed clothes at 12 in the afternoon, gotten it ready. A lot of decisions go in that particular order. That I have certain standard things that I do, but as a context, and we will make it on a mental note. All of this has been something that I'm not even talking of something new. I'm just getting mindfulness to it. That we have certain things that gets into the number of clothes. We start deciding on what are the colors, what are the whites. Again, standard set of activities, something that defines the context. We have an outcome now. Let's take one more stab at this. As a teacher, when you're teaching in your classroom, and please feel free to use the chat box as effectively. Don't worry about how this is going to be phrased. Just mention what do you think is a standard non-negotiable that you would like to have in mind. You don't have to keep it as an entire year. You can keep it for the next 3 weeks. You can keep it for next 1 month. But what's a non-negotiable for you that you would like to see in your classroom as such? Child's learning, enjoyable classroom. Okay. Safe classroom. Learning outcomes, learning. Fun classes, learning outcomes. Great. Now I'm going to ask you to define it a little more. each time that you notice this, the way that we spoke about that cup of tea, everybody had that passion to say, oh, this has to give me that little, thoughts around how does it make me feel good. Can you also start tying it a little more? When you say learning, it's good if you're able to tie it with a stronger benchmark that says probably 80% of mastery in math. Or when you're getting into inclusive, what does inclusive mean to you? The more you're able to define your outcome, it becomes easier for us to think backwards. But student voices, student choices, each individual should respect. Can you also come up with a benchmark that says, how do you find this particular outcome being met or not? If you can come up with, say, certain ways, more than 90% engagement. Thank you so much for that, Rutuja. Rutuja says 90% engagement. Prashant says high rate of engagement. Prashant, the more you're able to define it, it gets easier for you to break it down. Sangamitra says 100% students will feel safe. Extremely good. Pass rate likely to be 90%. Very interesting. So I'm just going to show an example of it. Just before I get there, when you think about this, let's talk about, and I'm going to take an example. Let's stay for a minute. Let's take that classroom learning as your one particular context as such. Let's say, let's want to have a mastery of about 80% in math. Now, can you just think about it? What are the standard activities that you do as teachers? Day in and day out, what are certain activities that you do on a recurring basis, on a regular basis?
Prasanna, can I interject? Sorry.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Can you, it'll be really supportive if you can speak little slowly. I'm finding it very difficult to keep, because of the bandwidth, I'm finding it very difficult to keep in.
Sure. All right. So my question right now is, as teachers, there are certain activities that you do on a recurring basis, right? What are those things that you do for your class? Say, be it planning, or say what you do in terms of your classroom. So Rutuja has said, now I see the messages are trickling in. Lesson planning, teaching assessment, teaching corrections, very interesting. So there is a certain set of activities that you do on a recurring basis. There is preparation. What do you think can be certain things that, despite your efforts, there are going to be places that this will not be able to reach the last set of students? Once again, I'm just going to open this up for us. When I say I'm looking at a particular grade, and I'm just giving you one example right now, which says when you're looking at pass percentage, you're saying 70% is the pass percentage that you want. There are certain activities that you do on a recurring basis, the number of subjects that you teach, the teaching concept that you're going with, your homeworks, your classworks, your tests, your exams, your plans. There are things that you do on a recurring basis. Then there are certain things that also define the context in which you're teaching. So if the students are not regular to the classroom, maybe you'll, despite your best of your planning, maybe you're not going to end up reaching your outcome as such. You may have differential learning levels. In certain cases, this room itself was an example. Hello. Yes, somebody wanted to say something. So this room itself was an example where, again, not just the room, but in general, say if we have a concept that we want to teach, and we think the students are probably not at the level to pick it up, that itself can be there are different ways that define how a student is reacting to things in the classroom. And while I put this up, this is not exclusively in these groups. When you get into, say, inclusive learning, maybe your learning levels becomes a standard variable to you. The context might end up being how many more things are you teaching them. These are not mutually exclusive groups, but depending on each of our context, depending on each of our piece of work, it ends up being that we are able to define certain things that we do regularly, and there are certain things that end up defining the context for us. I want to just open up a few more pieces that we've heard from different people, which includes, say, some people want to have the idea of discipline. Someone wanted to have the quality of teaching. The more you're able to define it, that how do you come up with the idea of how do you plan to track it? What is it that you want to put around this whole outcome that you want? It becomes easy for you to just track simple things, simple measurements that get you to places, right? So again, just the idea of discipline. Then there are some more folks who have spoken about what are the other pieces that they're looking at? What can be standard variables, like say after school centers can have, say, resources, the idea of libraries as such, the library of books as such, multiple things go into place. As teachers, most of us will have these criteria. And I'm also happy to work with some of us if you have doubts of how do you put this in your practices. If someone is looking at, say, inclusive education, what is that outcome that you want non-negotiable? How do you decide the variables? How do you decide the context? A lot of it can fall in place. Ideally speaking, most of us are aware of it, but probably not able to track all of them effectively, right? So that's how the whole process is going to move slowly.
Standard, what doing?
Sorry?
Fifth standard.
Fifth standard. Sorry? Okay. So once again, as the sessions move, we'll start getting into each of these spaces. Right now, just remember that even in your classroom, as teachers, there is always a non-negotiable that we want, irrespective of if we are planning for a year or if you're planning for just the next 3 weeks, there is something that we think is a non-negotiable number to us. There are certain activities that we do on a recurring basis that we are looking at, and there are some of them that will end up defining the context within which we are working. Right? And we'll look at a few more examples as we move the session. But just remember, there is going to be something around outcomes, there's something about variables, and we're going to find what that outcome is and see if the variables are working for us. In general, we're going to be talking about a 3-part piece right now. There's something called the 2-3-4 rule, and we're going to start talking about data a bit before we get into a little hands-on activity. There are 2 broad data types that we speak about traditionally. There's something called primary data type. There's something called secondary data type. Can someone just help me with what is primary, what is secondary? Does anyone know what is primary data, what is secondary data?
Primary data is what you collect, first hand. Secondary is any published data.
Any published data. Okay. Anyone else with any other idea? Secondary can be from other source, the base data, primary, the original data. Okay. Anyone else?
Primary data is nothing but the raw data, and secondary data is nothing but the refined data which has been collected from the from the parents, as we are teachers. So that is the reason why here we can use the word parents.
Interesting. So you're saying primary data is raw data, secondary is processed. Okay. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Last thought?
Yeah, may I?
Yeah, go for it.
So primary data is the original data that is collected by you, and the secondary data is the insight from that collected data.
Interesting. So you're saying the secondary data is insight that we make out of the raw data as such.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So a couple of different ideas. Yes, go for it. Last thought, please.
Yeah, I felt the primary data is first-hand data, which is collected either via surveys, questionnaires, observations, discussions. Yeah. Whereas secondary data is a data which is already existing with us, like the attendance, the assessments, all these data are already there with us. That is a secondary data.
Okay, interesting. So in nature, generally primary data, secondary data basically just means 2 things. Primary data is data that you collect personally. Okay. Secondary data is data that has come to you. Okay. In general, secondary data basically means it's data that is coming from a different source, which also means for any teacher who's collecting primary data, the minute you are giving your data to even your co-peer teacher, it becomes secondary to them. A lot of times we end up looking at data only in one lens, saying that I have collected my data, that is explaining everything. Not really. A lot of times data that we collect, even as we pass it to a school leader, even as we pass it to a fellow teacher, even as we pass it to a parent, we give them data sets that looks not completely sorted, just with some brief ideas. Every person understands data in their own way. So the onus of telling your story is also yours. The onus of holding your data, the way that you have your records, your marks, and we're going to get into a couple of examples, but each of them lies with you. So while we talk about primary and secondary, as primary, that's something I collect, secondary comes from different sources. Ideally, you yourself are a secondary source to someone else. Just keep that in mind as we work with data. Every time that you're working with data sets, there is a lot of informed choices that you've made. There is a lot of work that you put into collecting your data. But if you're not representing them in the way that you want to tell your story, your data is open to be interpreted by anybody the way they want to see it. Okay, we'll look at a few examples of it, but just remember, while we talk about primary, secondary, remember your data is automatically secondary to someone else. Anybody else who's looking at your classroom data has a secondary view to it. Okay, I'll take one more quick stab at this. Let's say there are 2 kinds of data. There is also this part where we start understanding how do we analyze a subject. There are 3 parts to any subject that we talk about. There's something about people. There's something about things. So there is a famous leadership coach who talks about how in life, everything that you look at has 3 parts to it. There is something around people. There's something that we do with regards to stuff. And there's something about situation. But when you think about it in classroom, I just break it down into 3 different ways. There are things that we do, which is all about our lessons, our plans, our delivery, our assessments, which is what most of us as teachers also track. And we are tracking that on a recurring basis. There are 2 other parts to it. Something called the engagement. How do people respond to our activity? How are we making sure that it's actually going out to people? We do track this, but a little more openly. We're not as mindful. In a lot of cases, we don't get as mindful about it. And then there is, of course, this idea of people, which is about, do we know who these people are? Do we understand what the student requirements are? Again, as teachers, we know it, but we don't track it as much. We're going to get into that process today. That let's start looking at, as teachers, most of us are focused on the things that we do, our delivery plan in the classroom, our way of delivering a particular topic, a subject, a plan. But can we also start looking at what are the engagements looking like? Can we also look at who these people are and what do we know about them? So lessons, plans, deliveries, those are most of the things that we are focusing on. Engagement is going to be something that we look at. And of course, the idea of how do you add significance to it? What do you track? Not everything has to be tracked at once. You can start tracking one thing. It'll start making sense to it. And finally, I'm just going to go to the last part of me talking before we get into a little hands-on activity. Generally in analytics, it's said there are 4 broad kinds of analytics. Analytics has 4 parts to it. There's something that says, if you look at this chart, that's something that says this starts at the lowest value and the lowest of difficulty. It says descriptive analytics. Descriptive analytics is nothing but just collection of information. Just pure collection of information. Almost all schools in this country are rich with it. We all have attendance, we all have records, we all have scores that have been constantly collected and kept in. As on today, more MISs are coming in, systems are getting a little easier for you to track exactly what's going on. But on an average, every school has a whole set of records that they've collected. Diagnostic analytics is when you start analyzing these pieces. That says, if I'm looking at attendance records, can I find a pattern of response? Can I find this idea that says, if I'm looking at attendance for the last 3 years, every July or August, we see the attendance going down. Do we see that probably the number of concepts that we can cover goes down in the month of August, September? And you start thinking about what can be the reasons for it. Once again, descriptive is just pure collection of records. Diagnostics gets into understanding certain things around what are the patterns that come out of it. Both of them are looking at data that has already happened. Then comes your 2 piece, which is predictive analytics. Based on data that you've already collected, can you make some predictions? We all make predictions in general. If we know attendance records kind of go down during the month of July or August, once you understand that pattern, you start thinking about, do you want to use the month of July for the harder concepts? Do you want to do a little more summaries over there? What can be the reasons that students are not coming to school? Can you give them a little more hands-on activity at home? Similarly, if you're looking at say, August, September, and you start finding that maybe these are the months that schools mostly have cultural activities, so we don't get to do the harder topics then, can we move something over there? A lot of your classroom practices can easily fall into this space if you just look back at the information that you already have. Right? There's a lot of predictive analytics that take shape. We do it in a recurring way. We just don't pay enough idea around how do we track it and just make these decisions. And finally, there's something called prescriptive analytics. Prescriptive analytics is when you're looking at large scale decision making. And someone talks about, say, RT12-1E. When someone talks about, say, how Atal Tinkering Lab can probably change how people are working with, classroom education as such. But prescriptive goes at a large rate. As teachers, we are comfortably in the space between we already have descriptive analytics going. Diagnostic is something that a lot of us can do, and predictive is something that we should be doing into our classrooms as such. We're going to be doing a bunch of things over there. But at this point, I'm going to get into a little hands-on activity with some some hands-on activity to do with things. Just before I get there, any questions right now? Any thoughts right now? We spoke about primary and secondary data. We spoke about 3 parts to any particular subject we're looking at. Something that we do, whom are we doing this for, and how are we doing it? There's going to be space for that. Finally, we spoke about 4 broad kinds of analytics: descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. Any thoughts right now? Awesome. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into a little hands-on activity and start making it a little simpler for us to just make a few, freehand activities as such. Before we start, there's a little, diagram that says the hope generally when you're working with data is the data is basically a nice tree with a whole bunch of insights on top of it as fruits. It's ready to drop on you. A lot of times you just need to find your way through this jungle, but it's going to get a lot more fun once you start understanding what's possible out of it, right? So before I start, does everybody have a sheet of paper and a few pencils or a pen with you? Give me a quick thumbs up if you have it. In the email, we'd asked you to get a couple of sheets of paper and a pencil. Thank you so much, Mr. Ganesh. Thank you, Preeti. Thank you, Shiv Narayana. Thank you. Okay, so what's going to happen is the next set of activities, you're going to do a bunch of freehand, drawing. Again, we're going to do it. We're not going to get into data tools immediately. We're going to go through it step by step. But the idea is I'm going to give you a few situations. We'll just try to put it into a sheet of paper, then we'll talk with it. Right? So we're going to start dirtying our hands working with data as such. The next 3 to 4 slides, data is given for certain situations. We're going to use some freehand, drawing as such. And then once completed, we can use that camera to show it or talk with it, right? I'm going to do the first one. I'm going to just show you the first one. It's a very simple one, which basically says total homework submitted over 8 days of given to us. Just we are tracking homework here. Just saying total homework submitted over 8 days is given to us here. On day 5, the homework was done, wherein instead of using textbook characters, we use certain TV characters. Okay, very simple activity. All I'm saying is total homework is submitted over 8 days. On day 5, homework was done with TV characters instead of textbook characters. We have the total number of students given to us in the classroom. It says 25. Then it gives day by day breakout, which says for each day, what is the number of homeworks that got submitted in. Okay. What we're going to do is I'm going to first start off with this idea. Just take a sheet of paper and you can draw 2 lines that goes vertically and horizontally. Just 2 straight lines as such. And once you've done what I've done here is with this sheet, on the horizontal line, I've plotted the day numbers, which says day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. We have about 8 days of information given to us. On the vertical line, we have the number of homeworks that's getting submitted. It says 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. Okay. So on day 1, if the number of homeworks given to us was around 15, then all I've done is on day 1, just opposite to 15, I've put a little dot over there. On day 2, if it's at 14, I've just put a dot over there. Day 3 goes down to about 12, day 4. And that's how I've created this little dot set of here. I'm going to put the numbers on the screen. I just want you to plot it. Once you're done, give me a quick thumbs up, please. These are the numbers. Once again, all I've done is created a sheet, taken a sheet, just drawn a line vertical, a line horizontal. In my case, I've taken the horizontal line as the number of days, the vertical line as the number of homework submitted. You can do it the other way around if that's convenient for you. Do what works for you. I just want you to feel the freedom of just working with this yourself. I put the dots and then I've connected them. I'm going to put the numbers up on the screen again. There we go. Once you put in the dots, I just want you to connect the dots and draw that little line. Thank you, Ms. Shipra. Thank you, Ms. Ritu. Thank you, Ms. Rutuja. Thank you, Mr. Shivnarayan. Did everybody get a chance to just do this? Thank you, Ms. Padmini. Done, done. Superb. Let's take exactly 30 more seconds. Just put the little dots. If you notice again, what's that outcome that we want here? What's that non-negotiable outcome that we are trying to go for here? What's the outcome that we want here? Homework.
100% submission.
Very nice. So we want a 100% submission. That's the absolute outcome that we want. What are the variables that's given to us here? What are the variables that we have?
Students and the days in which they submitted their homework.
Very interesting. So we have students and we have the days where they submitted the homework. Are they standard variables? Are these things that we work with on a daily basis? Yes, and I also see characters. Superb. So character is going to be what? Context, or is going to be standard? Again, not really a defined answer. This can go, each of us can have our own way of looking at it, but generally in this case, I would say it's a context. Superb. So if you've drawn the slides, I'm just going to quickly move on to this. I've connected the dots. What I've also done is on day 5 is where we drop the TV characters. So I've drawn a little line over there and I just mentioned it out that this is basically TV characters. Just a small indication that says when exactly did that little change element happen? And are we able to see a little change over there? Once this is done, can someone talk me through this? Do you think the outcome that we want, we are actually going towards the outcome that we want? Are we closer to the outcome that we want to see?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So we are able to see that if we are able to define this context, in this case, we are able to find that idea of getting closer to the outcome that we want. Another important thing to notice here is, if you notice the same activity that shows up on the slide, you don't have to tell anybody. It's self-talking for itself. The chart, the visual, our minds actually connect things on a visual basis. When I show you the same thing in a slide, it's much harder to understand. It's much harder to process. A lot of numbers, when we look at in classrooms, are cold numbers. We're looking at cold, hard numbers. It gets difficult to process. You look at the same thing as a visual, it gets much easier. You're quickly able to see you don't even need to be in a room to explain this to anyone anymore. If you just are able to show this in a visual, your school leader, your peer, anybody next to you exactly understands what is it that you've done. They understand exactly what's the context here. The same thing can be written in as many words, and it gets difficult even for ourselves. So first thing to remember is anytime that you're able to convert data into a visual, our minds understand visuals faster. We infer information faster. It's much easier to pick up a few cues from there. I'll move to the second example now. Did everybody get a chance to do this? And everybody got how to do this? I'm going to move to a second one now. Let's look at the second one now. Second one says the number of girls participating in extracurricular activities every month is given to you. The number of girls participating in extracurricular activities every month is given. In this month of September, we showed them a movie, Mary Kom. So we're looking at girls' participation. Total number of girls is given to us. We have the participation numbers given to us. You know what you have to do? Can you take the next few minutes to just do this? Just draw a similar chart and thank you. And Navya, can you just put that?
Done.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions you can directly ask us, but take the minute. What's the outcome that we want here? What is the outcome that we're looking for? You can just put it on the chat or you can just let me know, but or go ahead. Just finish your chart and we'll talk about it. Number of girls participating is given to us. In the month of September, some details given to us. Total number of girls participating is given to us. Once you're done with the chart or that little freehand drawing, and draw it the way that you would like. You don't have to restrict it to what I'm showing you on the screen. Please feel free to enjoy yourself working with this. Let me know once you're done. Thank you. I see one thumbs up that's showing up. 2 thumbs ups. Thank you. 3. Thank you. We'll just take another 2 minutes to just finish this off. Thank you. I see a few more thumbs ups. So 200 participants, I see about 7 to 8 thumbs ups. Can I get a few more, please? Yeah, thank you. Now I see the numbers going up. Thank you. Can I get a few more people trying it out? Give me a little thumbs up. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Adnan. I think we can go on unmute. We can go on the chat being spoken to. Yes, thank you. So based on, okay, firstly, let's again take a step back. What's the outcome that we wanted here? Can we go on unmute? We can just have people on unmute. What's the outcome that we wanted?
Maximum participation, all 16 girls.
Superb. What are the variables given to us?
Months and number of kids.
Okay, superb. What's that contextual change that we made here?
Mary Kom movie.
Okay, superb. So based on your chart, based on the visual that you have created, do you think we are going towards the outcome now, or did we have it better earlier?
After the movie.
Now.
After the movie? Okay. Anyone else? Does
It was
everybody
better earlier.
It was better earlier.
It's dropped.
It's dropped. Okay. Some of you are saying it's going up now. Some of you are saying it's dropped. How many of us have a visual that looks like this? Quick yes, please.
Yes.
Yes.
How many of you say no? How many of you say you don't have a visual like this? A no is completely fine. Please be least worried if you've done something different.
No, we'll have to put it according to January, February, right?
Interesting. Okay. Anybody who's put a January, February, do you have a chart like this?
Yes.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. So there is one chart that looks like this. There's one chart that looks like this. 2 different charts. Both of them showing very different trends. Coming from exactly the same source. Once again, We understand data in our own ways. People interpret data in their own ways. The idea is, if you look at the slide, this is the same slide. All of us are on the same call. It's the same slide, but the same data can be interpreted in two different ways. And it's not to say which one is wrong or which one is right. It all comes down to the context. In some cases, we've gone from May to February because either I've given the numbers in that particular order, or we also think of an academic year that goes from March to February. For some of us, we are thinking of the data in the annual year that goes from January to December. Each of us have inferred the data in our own ways. And once again, if you're looking at context, if I'm not wrong, a lot of schools in Northeast actually work from January to December. So your second chart probably fits in there. Maybe for the rest of the country, the other set of charts also work. And this is a very common issue across most spaces that we've seen in education, where there is a lot of data that as teachers we collect. There's a lot of context that we also have. But by the time it gets represented or somebody else is looking at the numbers, they're inferring it in their own ways. In this case, neither of the charts are wrong. Maybe your understanding or the way that you're trying to define your data might be very different as such. As somebody who's giving you primary data, it was my job to just add a little year here, which says May 2023 and then Jan 2024, and things could have been easily sorted out. Right? But in the absence of that, please remember, each of us infer data in our own ways. The same data can come up with two absolutely different insights. In one case, we are saying the movie worked, the intervention worked. In one case, we are saying it was better, and we are probably seeing a growth, but it's never really gone back to the level that we were at. Right? So please remember, your primary data is always going to be different. People understand data in different ways. People interpret data in their own ways. Finally, let's look at one more piece right now. I'm just going to get into one more example since we have the time. Otherwise, sorry.
Excuse me. Yeah. The way I interpreted data, I'm now feeling so stupid. I went left-hand side first. I jotted down everything. Then I went on to the right-hand side.
I didn't know.
I went May, July.
But there's nothing to feel stupid about this at all, ma'am.
So I went May, July, September, November, January. Then I went to June. That is how I plotted it.
That's also because I've given you the numbers like that. You basically went to May, July, September. You read the numbers that way.
Yeah.
And once again, you don't have to feel stupid about it. It's about how I'm presenting the data to you.
Yeah.
And this is again another example. We could have done the best amount of work, but if you're not presenting the data in the way it's being understood, it ends up creating more chaos than coming up with insights.
Yeah.
Okay? So great example of just seeing the same data from the same slide can mean two very different things to different people. I'm going to walk to the third slide. It is a rather relatively simpler one. We have a complaints jar in a school. We are just seeing the number of complaints coming into a complaint jar is coming to us. We are tracking it on a weekly basis. End of week 3, we give them 20 minutes of game time, and then we have the numbers in front of us. You don't really have to plot it, but if you see the numbers, can you tell me what is going on here? Can someone walk me through what do you think is happening here? Do you think the numbers are going up, going down, and then we'll start getting into something a little more? Yeah.
Maybe the complaints are more about the physical activity or the PT period that they wish for.
Okay, so you're saying that there is complaints are coming from the activity itself. Interesting. Okay, anyone else? Thank you.
After the end of third week, the number of complaints have gone down drastically.
Okay.
So people need some games every day. That's what it's saying.
Okay, anyone else?
Perhaps the class has had a few disturbances in the first 3 weeks, which were sorted out after the 3 week using an intervention or something.
Super. Anyone else?
Or maybe after week 3, when students were engaged in gaming, they didn't have the time to express their complaints.
But do you see the complaints are going up again?
Yeah, because the intervention works only for a certain period of time.
Very interesting. Okay.
Because maybe after week 5, now they are getting used to these 20 minutes, and again the complaints are going up.
Superb. And more interestingly, do you notice how suddenly when the numbers are in front of us and we've done 2 visuals, our minds automatically try to make connections with the ground. And that's what we want to be doing as teachers. A lot of times our time is spent more on just tracking the numbers, putting them into a little order that we're trying to make some sense out of it. But now just the idea of being able to track it, just because you were able to convert a couple of visuals, it didn't take me more than a minute that someone suddenly started saying maybe the game time is where we're getting the complaints from. Maybe the physical activity is where we're getting the complaints from. A lot of times we are able to think of a context. And that's the most key part here. As teachers, we probably have a lot more context to what's going on.
Another insight which is coming, Prasanna, to me is maybe some team bonding and team building is happening after the team games, which lasts for a couple of weeks.
Right. Correct. So there is probably a team-wise. Interesting, right? So each of us suddenly also have hypotheses. Also, Navya, can you just open the chat for everybody? I think a lot of direct messages are coming. I would love for people to also now start reading each other's messages. The idea of data, again, is when we have a set of numbers in front of us, representing a story from the ground, you start finding teachers talking to each other. You start finding teachers telling each other what can be the possibility of things. You start finding how each of us may have a hypothesis. Each of us can go back and check. Each of us can validate it for ourselves. But the idea is numbers have become simpler now. We are able to suddenly track something that we are able to find a context of what we can imagine happening on our ground, which is great, right? Which is where we want to be. Instead of speaking only with anecdotes, instead of speaking with only recurring memories of saying we saw something there, by giving something, Prashant says 20 minutes is not enough anymore. And Prashant, when you're probably coming to this classroom, maybe you can try something different, right? But you have something to start with. There's a hypothesis that you're starting with that says, I'm going to try something a little differently. Somebody said probably complaints are happening in, see, there's something called groupism, probably, right? And again, the idea is when you're able to look at these data points in a reflective way, you'll find your minds making connections. We did 3 examples. The first example is when you just create your data into visuals, your mind automatically makes connections. Numbers looked at in a very cold way doesn't really talk to you. The minute you're able to turn it into a little visual, it speaks for itself. Second example that we saw was talking about how the same data can be interpreted by different people in different ways. It was the same source, 2 people understood in 2 absolutely different ways. Third one just tells you that there is a lot of context that as teachers we hold. And the minute we are able to just look at a pattern of things, our minds automatically start thinking about what can be the reasons for it. We need to just enable ourselves to get there. Teachers have most of the solutions. Teachers know the context of challenges that you're working with. What becomes a challenge is how do you pass this information? How do you work with this information as such? Yes, Mr. Praveen, you wanted to say something? Okay. Ms. Swati also has a comment. Okay, very nice. So I'm going to take one more example now, and with this, we'll start getting into something more. Let's say we're suddenly looking at maybe a EdTech product, maybe we're giving some tools to somebody, but there's something called Chick-Chack Learning, and basic Chick-Chack Learning promoted on social media with someone called Mr. Chirat Kohli. In month 3, they partnered with Pragyananda, who's a leading child prodigy. We have a set of things given to us. There's something that says total impressions, total reach, total engagement. Again, these are terms from a very different world, I'm sure. But at the same time, we are looking at, say, EdTech tools coming into our classroom. We are looking at, say, teachers being able to create their own content. The idea is suddenly there's a piece that says Chick-Chack Learning promoted on social media. In month 3, you partnered with somebody. There is information given to you about impression, reach, engagement. Impression is just how many people did get your content. Reach is how many people actually clicked on it, looked at it, how many people engaged with it. So based on this, if you have to find which one is working, which one is the best that's given you results, how hard or difficult is it right now to do this?
Oh, it's easy. Engagement is what we're looking for. 120 is the best.
But 120 out of what?
Oh, right.
Right. So if you're looking
120 out of 560.
Correct.
Whereas it is 100 out of 320. So that is definitely better.
Right. Anyone else? But now you start looking at this. We mentally know what we're looking for, but it's harder to do these calculations. And that's where data tools come into place. So please understand, a lot of us start thinking about data tools as a whole bunch of formula, things going to happen. Not really. A data tool is always sitting behind what you're trying to do here. In this case, as an average human, when information is given to us in 4 rows, 3 columns, there is about 12 different pieces of information that we're looking at simultaneously. Things start getting harder. If you're looking at data, look at what are you going for. In this case, we had this conversation that says engagement by reach is probably what you're going for. Maybe that's where you start moving into using the tools now, what is available to you, to do that calculation for you, right? This is where the tools start taking shape. So as we understand working with data, tools start playing a very important role in doing the harder activities for us. It's still the same thing as teacher decisions that we're building. Our decisions are still coming out of the same place. We know what we're looking for. We know how to break that data up. In this case, let's say I'm just going to convert reach by impression and engagement by reach. It takes us a minute to do this using a tool now. that says what's that engagement rate looking like. And suddenly information will start getting easier for us to process. This quickly says 21%, and now the decision gets a lot easier. Once again, a lot of times we start struggling with data tools because we think data tools are supposed to give us answers. Data tools helps us get to the answers faster. The decision making, the thought process of what that data is talking to us still remains with us. In this case, as someone rightly pointed out, if you're looking at, say, engagement rates now, 100 out of 320 is obviously a much higher engagement rate you're looking at compared to, say, a 120 out of 560. But to do that, we get the idea where we're going with it. The tools end up helping us a lot more to get there, right? In a very similar example, if you notice, and anybody who's got any thoughts right now, Vidisha ma'am says engagement is not bad. In fact, it's a much better comparison. Interesting impression. Interesting. Okay. And if I take the same example, when I look at a classroom level information, there's a lot of information that as teachers we store. If you're looking at a sheet, it is got about, this sheet itself has about some 7 columns of information. We have 30 rows of information. We have tons of student data in front of us. It starts getting harder to make sense of all of them because as people, we are not.
Prasanna,
yes, ma'am.
hi. If you're showing the sheet, we cannot see.
You're not able to see the sheet.
Yeah.
One second. Thank you for that. This special. Are you able to see the sheet now?
Yes. Could you also show the data change which you did using the tool?
Yes, I'm just going to show that to you. Sorry, my bad. Thank you for pointing that out. So if you notice now, this numbers obviously in this space is hard to make connections to. But when you move it into a data tool, you let the tool do the harder bits for you. And that's where the tools come in handy. The whole point of tool is to do things faster for you. If you're able to quickly turn them into visuals or these numbers to be calculated, that's where the tools come in handy. And we understand that. We all know that. But the idea is the formative idea of what you want to look at these numbers, how do you want to put them to use, still stays with you as a teacher. It's your decisions that get built in. In this example, if you notice, once again, as somebody rightly pointed out, 100 out of 320 is obviously giving you a lot more engagement rate compared to, say, a 120 out of 560. We also have them as numbers. It's easy for us to show them as numbers, or it gets even easier as you start putting them into charts as such. So I'm going to show you one more quick example of it. Here is a grade 4 sample. When you're looking at grade 4 sample here, it talks about 30 students of information, 7 columns of information. There is number, there is date, there is student names. And again, these are standard data sets that you see in your classrooms. It's kept in a way that I've seen most MISs in schools also generating data. It may look a little mashed up. It may look a little, all over the place as such. But you have 30 students worth of data here. You have 2 subjects of data. And this itself is quite intimidating, right? Can you give this data sheet for idea? Sure, Ms. Divya, I'll give you the sheet for idea. But let me just talk about this data right now. This itself is hard. And imagine that for a minute, let's also put ourselves into somebody else's shoes. Imagine that this is my classroom. And you're walking into my classroom now. You're going to be taking my classroom up. This is the numbers given to you. It's hard to find what you're looking at, say what Amitabh's score is, what Sushank's score is. But there are cues using the tool to work with. Let me start with a quick example. If I just pick up the scores in English and just add a little visual to it, just give me a second. If I just add a little cue that says a little visual to the numbers, and you will find your mental connections going to this gets a lot easier. You'll suddenly start finding that your ways of making connections to the numbers goes much faster. Usually we just read from student to scores. When you're just able to add a little visual, you're able to think backwards. Who are those 75, 72, 72? It's easier for you to figure out who these students are. Amir, Carol's, Abu. Okay. Imagine you're walking into this classroom for the first time. I can also do another quick piece right here. And that quickly allows you to also compare certain trends. That are we looking at similar trends between 2 subjects? Are we looking at the same students performing in 2 different subjects in similar ways? A little visual, automatically you'll start finding that you're making mental connections to them a lot more. If you look at this, it'll also give you some cues that say some students. Yes, Ms. Ranjana.
Sir, is this available in Google Sheets also? I work with Google Sheets.
In Google Sheets, for you to build a data bar, there are certain formulas that you're allowed to use.
Okay.
So there's something called a data bar formula that you're allowed to write. It's called a Sparkline formula over there.
Okay.
But it's available.
Sure. Thank you.
But once again, Ranjana, what I would also insist is don't get lost into using Google Sheets or Excel. There are certain capability that Excel has. There are certain capability that Google Sheet has. Okay. A lot of times you can just quickly download that Google file, turn it into Excel, just look at the visual that you're going for. Figure out what your big, challenge that you're trying to figure out. It's easier to use these visuals, then go back to the Google Sheet and color it off.
Right. Okay.
Right? But find effective ways for you. The important part is you have a thought, hold on to that thought, get the other parts done using the tools.
Sure.
In this case, if you notice right now, you're also able to quickly see certain students have scored 0. Some of them have scored a 0 and a 55. Probably mentally, you'll start thinking that maybe when you're coming to my classroom, the student has scored 55, which means in another subject that says 0, probably the student would have been absent for an assessment. Probably assessment has not happened. Compared to say when you're seeing a 0 to a 27, maybe that looks a little more in range with what the student might be scoring, but this starts giving you some sense of how to start understanding the classroom. Even before you're walking in for the first time, if you just gotten a sheet to you from somebody outside, your secondary data to you, it starts giving you some pulse to work with it. Also look at this particular group. We have a set of students who are scoring similarly, 75, 78, 76. We have the top 3 performers given to us. But let's say if I'm suddenly looking at the student called Shilpa Patel. Shilpa Patel is one of the students who scored a 63 and a 28. By the way, the numbers that I'm showing you right now are actual numbers. They've been, the student names have been masked, obviously, but these are simulations of real classroom data that I'm showing you. If you notice now, there's someone called Shilpa who scored about 63 in English and 28 in math, which means the student is definitely doing good in English, but she has to have some help in math. A lot of times that middle group students get lost in everything that we're doing. As teachers, our brain is probably functioning with the first 5 students or the last 3 students. A lot of times such challenges exist, right? There's a middle group that we believe she's doing good in English, she might be doing well in math also. Certain patterns like this quickly helps you find that little anomaly that says, wait, there's some girl who's actually struggling in one subject and she's doing well in another one. If I take it off, Shilpa is again lost. Just in a group of 30 students, she's lost again. By virtue of just adding little things, it completely changes how you start analyzing your classroom. You start looking at score, patterns, and then looking back at your students as such, right? And there are tons of such things. There are tons of such ways of doing this. Any questions, any thoughts right now as we do this? Anyone, any thoughts as such? You can use the chat. You can just let me know on.
It's wonderful. Looking at numbers and the color makes life so simple as a school leader. In a click, blink and you know where exactly the class is. So it's wonderful.
And ma'am, does it relieve you immediately to just think about it? The relief that you get from just getting there itself is a boost for you, saying that what is the action that I want to think for these students, right? In a very similar way, if I look at another question here that basically says, I just want to understand who, and just like ma'am, you have to be Excel proficient, and that's completely fine. I mean, getting Excel proficiency is the easier bit here. Knowing what we're going for is the part that we have to think for ourselves. Because to be honest, you'll get enough tutorial that tells you how to go about doing it. Rather, we conduct workshops just where you combine the idea of mastering Excel with the idea of what you're going to go for. But let me just walk through a few more bits and then I'll talk about this. That's what the whole data tools is all about, right? There is also a piece that says middle scoring group. We are looking about middle scoring group. So maybe in this sheet, if you know how to work with tools, I already have a sheet that says, I just want to look at students who are scoring a grade C. A lot of us spend a lot of time doing grading activity. If you know your tools as such, it actually makes your life a lot simpler. If I just take this and run this right here, I've already preset this. In my preset case, I've just said my grades are basically 75, 75 to 45 and 45 and below. I've preset certain conditions here. But by the virtue of setting the conditions, it takes me less than 10 seconds to set it up. And my grading gets done. More importantly, if I've set it up in the right way, then I also know who the students are who are falling in grade C. My entire time is spent working towards who these students are, what are the challenges that they have, than work with just the hard-cold numbers again. Right? And once again, if I'm looking at this sheet,
sorry, Prasanna, to interrupt you in the middle. I guess here Power BI tool has been used. Am I correct?
No, ma'am. This one is right now. I'm just using simple Excel.
Okay.
I'm just using simple Excel right now.
Okay, thank you.
And this Excel again, one more time. The reason that we do this session in Excel is because Excel is available to everybody, right? The idea that we have tools, a lot of us don't realize that we've gone through a lot of MISs, we've gone through a lot of apps, but there is some of the strongest tools available to us for free.
Yeah, like Power BI.
Power BI, you still need a school ID. Not every school has that actually.
Yeah, true. But once it has been, we'll get the access, means everything can be done, right? Graphically, we can get the data and everything.
Absolutely. But Power BI, I'll tell you the challenge is Power BI is a dashboarding tool. Power BI doesn't allow you to imagine your scenarios. Like Excel, it's very nifty. That you can create subsets, you can quickly run something to figure out if this is the kind of slicing or dicing of information that you're looking at. Power BI generally works once you have a set format ready, saying that these are the 10 things that I'm going to be tracking for the next 1 year. Then Power BI dashboards help you track it over a longer period of time.
Okay, got it.
Thank you. Yes, Ms.
Thank
Sita?
you. Show me the grading once again.
How did I do the grading?
Yeah.
Ma'am, there are preset. Again, this is where Excel kind of helps you. There are certain formulas that just help you get there. In this case, I had a preset formula. I had already had my condition. Schools, a lot of schools already have this condition that says if somebody is scoring more than 80, then they're going to be grade A. 80 to 75 is grade B. And there's a whole criteria that you have. Right? Similarly, rather, just because the school has a grading doesn't mean that you have to follow exactly the same. You can give something for your school. But in the context of your classroom, maybe you would like to change that definition. In this case, if you notice 75 to 45, it clearly says here, I can probably increase the threshold. I can probably say, I just want to take students who are scoring less than 35 to be my grade C. And if I run that, it's again going to just change this number to the number of students I'm working with. The idea is not the formula. The idea again is what are you trying to look for? How are you trying to create these groups? What is it that you're defining for yourself? Once you know who are the grade C students, what is the kind of actions that as teachers, we already have these actions. Grade C ke bache, we're going to do all these things. Grade A bache, we're going to get into say some kind of worksheets. Once again, you don't have to set a goal for the entire year. You can start with just 3 weeks. But simple activities allow you to track a whole bunch of ideas here. Okay. Shrita, you had your hand raised. Do you have something for me?
No, I completed my question.
Any other question right now? Anybody, any thoughts?
Yeah, Prasanna, I have a question here. How exactly it is working? Can you please explain? Because any you're writing any code or how exactly it is coming?
I'm just writing a simple formula, ma'am. And actually, we do a lot of formula workshops as well. But it just says equal. I'm just saying if a number is greater than a particular value that I'm looking at, then I'm going to call it as a grade A. And there's a whole series that actually goes into it. Right? There's a whole series, and these formulas are available. Rather, we do extensive workshops on just getting you on board with understanding data and then understanding the tool. Right? A lot of times what happens is we learn tools, but we don't know how to apply them in place. If you are able to understand what you're going for, then understanding how the tool is going to do for you, it makes sense for you. It's going to get much easier.
Yeah, now got it. Thank you.
Hello.
I'm going to move to one more example. Yes, Mr. Noor.
Yeah, instead of formulas, can we use a conditional formatting?
I can use conditional formatting as well. So if you notice, these are basically conditional formatting only that shows up. These color codes, right? Yeah. But conditional formatting, again, each of us find our own ways. There are some ways that the tool also allows you to create the subset of a sheet, wherein I just have the sheet auto-populating only C grade students with C grade, right? For that, I need these to populate here. The sheet basically has only a group of students who probably are of a different grade that we're looking at. I can share the sheet with you tomorrow when you're coming to my classroom. You can plan just for them, right? Similarly, idea of creating these segments that you're able to share with your peer, or you can, segment your ideas into what you want to be doing for them gets much easier here. Okay, I'm going to take one more example. This is again a larger set of data. Again, a lot of times this is a large set of data. A lot of times, and I think I missed that one sheet here, a lot of us collect attendance in tools. A lot of us have tools that we collect attendance with, wherein we have attendance going in. We basically have the list of days going across, and then we have the list of students here. All I've done is I've just tagged the information in a way that's going to make some different kind of a sense here. If you notice right now, the sheet has a bunch of information. Let me just quickly put this up. If you notice now, the sheet has about 2 schools of information, and I'm showing you 2 schools. It can easily be just 2 grades. It can be, depending on your context, it's multiple, setups that we're looking at here. It says there are multiple schools given to us. If you look at, there are multiple teachers given to us here. We have about 8 teachers, 2 schools. I have about 2 grades, multiple sections. There is data for about 4 months of data. There is about 4 months of data given to us here, generated. And the date obviously has to be in order, but it shows up something, and we have a list of students. All I have is just simple marking. We do this on a recurring basis. All we've done is attendance. I'm going to start finding some trends within attendance now. I'm just going to find a few trends here. Let me just find this, and we're going to do some decision making just together. Okay, and I'm just going to see if I can quickly run this for you. Give me a second. So let me just say, just going to call this as say, mark this presence in numbers, and I'm going to show this to you. Let me just do this. Just equal to if. And there we go. And just bear with me for a minute. My Excel had to hang. There you go. It basically ran. Very nice. Give me a second. And I'm going to run this up. What happens when you collect data on a daily basis? This is nothing but attendance that we collected on a daily basis from each classroom just combined together. So imagine that you have multiple grades. As schools, we are already combining these attendances. I'm going to quickly show you one example of it. What happens when you are able to summarize data? Once again, data collection, there can be a lot of theories that we work with, but once you're able to just understand the basic summaries of data, give me a second. And where we go. Pick this up. Oh. Just give me a second. I'm going to reopen the sheet. For some reason, it's giving a little bit of a challenge here. Bear with me for a minute. Yeah, there we go. Let's do this. I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to start summarizing information. Let's make some decisions together. I'm just going to quickly turn this into a little summary table and let's see what comes out of it. Let's say I have a list of schools. You've seen we have 2 schools. We have about 8 teachers. We have multiple grades, multiple classrooms. We're going to start summarizing information to build some large decisions. I have 2 schools of data given to me. There is something called AU schools. There's something called Saral schools. I just want to look at which school has a better performance in attendance right now, just attendance ratios. The same is applicable across other pieces as well, but just to make it easier for us to make these comparisons. Let me just say, I just want to look at the overall average attendance. Oops. And again, the idea of showing this to you is because you already have these tools with you. Some of these tools are pretty much available to us for free. If you notice now, based on what you see on the screen, can someone just tell me which school has a better attendance ratio? Which school seems to be doing better in attendance? Straightforward, right? You're visiting multiple schools, you're probably, and I'm giving it to you as schools. This can easily be grades. It can easily be sections. But one of them is doing better. We are quickly able to say AU schools obviously have a better attendance compared to Saral schools. But let's start digging a little deeper. If I just take the same data set and start getting a little deeper with it, if I just pick up, say, grades, and let's look at this data grade-wise and see what the summaries talk about now. If you look at grades now, AU schools basically has a higher percentage, but if you notice, as the grades are going up, the attendance has rather fallen down. At a higher grade level, you start noticing that the number of students are probably coming to school has dwindled. While Saral schools, the number of students who are coming to grade 6 is probably higher. Not probably, it's higher than what it is in grade 4. Right? Once again, the idea is not to just find what is right, what is wrong. It's about when you see these numbers, you start finding your mental connections of what you want to be doing with each of these grades or each of these schools. In this case, somebody who's probably working with AU schools, or this can be just a grade and a section, but probably think about what is it that the higher grade students have as a challenge in coming to the school. Compared to, say, when you're looking at the other one, which basically says the lower grade is where you're having a challenge. Your actions, your action points, your actionables start changing based on how these numbers are talking back to you. If I take another quick example of the same thing, if I just take the same thing up and I run it with another case, if I just take this and I run this by, say, oops. Again, it's all about just how have you saved your information. If I just pick up, say, gender of the student, because I want to look at 2 sections, how a boy is doing versus how a girl is doing. The information was given to me. I break it down and it starts giving me some summaries again. The idea is again not to find the best case scenario. The idea is out of everything that you're working with, how are you able to find certain summaries that tell you where just your next action need to be? There are a whole bunch of academic frameworks that we talk about, but that can always be secondary to first you understanding what the data is talking to you first. In this case, if you notice, in Saral schools, you notice that boys basically were coming in grade 4 was much lesser. By grade 6, the number has actually gone up. So there's something that's happening there. While compared to AU schools where the number of boys coming to school has dropped significantly. Same thing with girls. Girls have also fallen down. Girls, the fall is much higher. Again, just allows you to start looking at things a little more, saying, what is it? It's not about which is doing better. It's about, again, thinking about what are the actions you would like to do with each of these schools. Take one more example. Is everybody good so far? Is everybody good so far? Does it seem interesting? Does it seem like there can be a bunch of things that will actually come up? Yes, the figuring out the tools, Prashant sir, that is the easier bits, right? The tools are available there. The idea is, are we able to see that this will help me build some actions? That when I notice my students are not regular, who are the students who are not regular? What is it that I have to do here? What are the steps that's coming into my mind? Where do I have to put them in place? Simple visuals, simple way of looking at things, breaking data down, right? I'll do one more quick example of this. Let me just take another one. Let's take the same numbers and let's make a decision right now. We have 8 teachers worth of data. We have to choose which teacher has been doing really well. And we have to choose which teacher probably needs a little support plan, right? All I'm going to do is just look at attendances and I'm going to make some summaries here. I'm just going to find this idea of, let's say, I just want teachers. I'm going to take the schools out. And by teacher, I'm just trying to find which teacher has the best. I mean, which teacher is the one that I'm going to reward, which teacher is the one who needs support. Based on the data given to you, what are your thoughts as such? In your opinion, what do you see here? Who are the teachers who need support? Who are the teachers who probably can do well? Again, the idea is on top of this, a lot of things can happen, but this is data that you're collecting on a daily basis. None of what we're showing you here is data that you don't have already. Based on this, whom do you think needs a reward? Whom do you think can use a support?
Ross needs support.
Okay. It's a reward for Chandler. Okay. Okay.
Phoebe would get a reward.
Interesting. So you're saying Ross needs support because his number stands at 57.3 and Phoebe got how much? 89.9. So she deserves a reward. A lot of times such decisions are made, right? A lot of times such decisions are made. But if I add a layer of context, what happens if I'm just able to add one more layer of just context here? If I just take one more little piece of information, it says, let's look at this by a breakout as well. I just say this. Say, bear with me for a minute. And I'm going to run this by. Now I'm just going to do a little change to the whole data set. It's the same data, but just with some added information. Okay. Once again, data that you already have, none of what we're doing here is something that you haven't collected before this. But I'm just going to do the same data set one more time. This time, choose the teacher again. Teacher goes on rows. We look at, say, attendance. So I have the attendance coming up in averages. I'm going to pick this up, turn them into a quick average. There we go. Turn these numbers into averages. And we already spoke about how Phoebe probably is the better performing. Ross needs support. And that's exactly how we take a lot of decisions. But what if I just add one more layer to this? I just add sorry, my bad. I'm just going to make a new one. Let's not complicate this more. Let me just take this and say the idea is teachers. We have the percentage. We turn this into a percentage bit here. There we go. All right, so let's look at this a little deeper now. I'm just going to pick a month and put it on columns. This is again a lot of information. This starts getting difficult for us to process. And that's where I'm going to use the tool again. The idea is again, the tools are going to fall under our decisions right now. We want to understand who's doing better, who's doing worse. A lot of numbers here. Just going to add one more little line. Again, accessible tools to us. As teachers, we have access to this. This is freely available. Data is coming in mass set from MISs and where not. One quick visual. And you start noticing certain trends. If you notice now, we suddenly have broken the data down by a little larger sense. Ross actually had a number that went up. Now let's look at the numbers a little closer. The school or the grade that Ross was working in, he started off with a 38.3% as attendance. It went up to 60, 62. So probably he was working in a much harder classroom to start with itself. While Phoebe probably worked in a grade where the numbers are much higher to start with. And there was a dip and she's been able to catch it, but at least you're still able to see that probably a lot of times just getting a little deeper into that information, just breaking it down to understand what makes my data up. What are the pieces that's making my data up? What's the correlation I'm able to see out of it? It converts a lot of decisions into some more actionable, palatable pieces as such. Right? So there are 4 broad ideas of even data analysis. We talk about this. We talk about something that says deconstruct your data, understand what makes your data up, look at patterns, and then find relationships. But this is just the start of it. This quickly tells you that when you start looking at 4 months of information, it starts giving you some inputs on how these decisions are getting made. Again, decisions we made right here together. Is it possible to get the data in pictorial format? Yes, right here. Right? And again, these are data pieces available to you, accessible. When I was working in a school myself, again, like I said, my journey was in the last 10 years. I come from a space where we were working with data analytics for a very different set of audiences. We were trying to understand customers, how they actually end up making decisions, but there were still people. My opportunity while I was working in my corporate was I got a chance to work with the Michelle Obama's Let's Move project, which was what my genesis to working with students was, that how do we understand why children are eating the kind of food that they're eating. And it was a great realization that we already had so much information in schools. And this was in US. Once I came back to India and I joined an NGO, I started working with Teach for India. The revelation was strong that as teachers, we collect a lot of data. Everything that I've shown you so far, attendance is data that you collect. Scores are data that you collect. And there are multiple such pieces. As teachers, we actively collect some data pieces. And there are certain things that is residing in our mind. There's a lot of student background information that we host amongst ourselves. There's a lot of family information that we host amongst ourselves. There's a whole space that we start doing things with, just available with tools that's accessible to us. Right? In this case, if you notice, all we've done is right now, we've just sorted information. We had data stacked together, we had names together, we had the scores together. In attendance case, instead of taking all the attendance across the board, we had them stop by just sorting information. Suddenly a lot more unlocks. Right? And this is just an example of what we can do with things. All of this is possible by you. None of what I've shown you right now, we haven't even gotten to academic frameworks of breaking assessment down. All that will follow up once you know how easy it is to use a data tool to do it. That you're able to think of your destination, finding a journey using the tool gets much easier. In this case, all we've done is sorting. But in general, if I just show you across the board, we had done multiple set of such things. And these are highly possible by every teacher. That if you create a Google form, a lot of us use Google Forms to create these kind of assessments that we given an assessment, there's a whole quiz, a whole set of questions that go in. But if you know how to use the tool, you can also think backwards, just having your assessment tools ready, saying, how will the assessment look like? What is the breaks that you want to see? A lot of breaks are given to us by MIS tools today. We have a lot of great organizations that are coming up with assessments broken down, but there's a lot of latent knowledge that teachers also have for yourselves. That I would like to break my classroom into, say, when I'm looking at learning breakouts, I'm going to break my paper. Each time that you create an assessment, it says sports, music, cinema, and world affairs. This could have easily been, say, algebra versus geometry versus, say, word problems. This could have easily been reading versus writing versus, and things that you already think of when you're making the assessment papers. This sheet right now, the minute a student writes an assessment there, will automatically pick up their scores because the tools allow you to do it. It's just giving you a breakout domain-wise. It also creates a little breakout by students as such. None of what I've created here is something that I have done because I had some extraordinary ideas. Not at all. I just knew that we are looking at certain ways of breaking data down. This is giving you a learning breakdown. As teachers, we also started looking at what are our cues in terms of, say, when we give word problems versus objective problems. When you're looking at, say, audio-visual problems versus non-audio-visual as such. We have different levels that we keep in our own mind. Each teacher in your own heads, we all have this kind of ways of looking at mastery. Just learning certain tools, just having some idea of how do you put these frames kind of helps you build a lot more. Just giving you mastery by each question. That when I create a 12-mark paper or when I have 30 questions, where do I see the paper efficiency going in? How do I measure that up? How does that make it easy to understand? And out of 30 questions, which are the pieces that students are not responding mostly to? So many things actually start getting uncovered. And finally, once you just understand the tool, it gets easier for you to create these personalized role cards. That just allows you to create a information. Once again, the idea is not to create this as much. It's much easier to communicate with somebody outside in the outer world using charts, because now you're suddenly moving away from subjective conversations to objectively looking at data. So many cases we've seen parents who probably have a challenge in, not that they have a challenge, but we have a challenge in communicating things to parents. So many times that teachers find it difficult to talk to parents as such. If you're able to turn all your views into a little chart or a visual in front of them, you'll suddenly find all your conversations go objective. They're no longer looking at you as somebody that they are trying to, counter with. There is a sheet in front of you, all your attention goes right here. And that's the whole power of data. Again, the idea is we did a whole bunch of simple ideas of looking at grades, we broke it down. We looked at attendance, we were able to break down into larger decisions. As you just build certain capacities, it just allows you to do so much more. This is just an example of just showing these report cards as such. Let me just show you what else is possible. If I just look at, say, and ma'am, somebody said Power BI, I'm going to show you an example of Power BI. This time I'm going to use Power BI to tell you what the summary of stories were. This is something that we did again with the attendance. If you look at anybody who's worked in a government school, or I'm sure that most schools, if you look at it, there is a sheet of data that gets collected on a recurring basis. In our case, we had this data being collected on a daily basis, where the data was collected saying how many boys, how many girls are coming to class by grade, by section, by caste, by gender. And we were all having this kind of stacks of information given to us that somebody would enter this course into. As on today, probably the way this information is recorded has changed. You may end up having MISs and apps to do it instead of a register, but you still are entering this data. But how many times have we gone back to check what comes out of it? In our case, when we were able to do very simple digitizations as Excel, at one point at the end of 3 months, we were able to convert them into a little graphic. And this is the assessment that came out. If you look at these numbers, this is basically giving you girls' attendance in the school. When we started summarizing it, this is actually, once again, what I'm showing you is a part of things that we've done. Like we've noticed, it's not to say that we have done, but trends that we noticed. In this school, we noticed that every Thursday, the number of girls who were coming to school was basically dipping off. When you're looking at 2,000 students, when you're looking at even 1,000 students, you're able to see it in an assembly, but you're not able to put a finger to it. When you're able to turn it into a quick visual, a chart, it burns into your mind. You will never be able to unsee it again. In our case, in that particular school, when we did this, we had about 12 teachers who basically came to the staff room. All of us tried to understand why this is happening. We couldn't find a reason to it, but here is the good part. As teachers, we are sitting with primary data. We are sitting with directly the students to whom we can directly ask what is going on. I was teaching in a government school in a community, and for us, we got to know that every Wednesday night, there was a little festival ritual that was going on, and the girls were basically attending that. Thursday morning, they were fasting, so they were not coming to school. It's not as if somebody made them not to come to school. They just chose not to. While this happened in a community school for me, and again, the idea is once teachers are able to see it, teachers are able to self-drive action. Somebody spoke to the parents, somebody set some kind of other rules up, somebody had other actions as such, but each teacher was able to work with their own action as such. In a funny twist of events, when I tried doing this with another big school, we realized that for them, their sports classes during Mondays were actually low in maintaining the discipline of it. They were just tracking, they started tracking just the way students were turning up in uniform, sports shoes and whatnot. And they were able to find a trend that said across the weekend, post-weekend Mondays, students don't turn up into the kind of sports or the kind of activity that they're supposed to follow up. You see it on a daily basis, but once you are able to put this into simple visuals, you will find that urgency in you to make the decisions as such. This is just one example that I'm showing right now, which talks about attendance. In this case, once we got to know that this was going on, we were able to plug it. Same thing, you will find yourself compelling, finding these reasons to work with. Another example that I'll show you is, again, just talking about parents. There are so many different times that we work with parents where we tell them things that they don't even agree with. But when we are able to show them the same information that we're talking to them, even if it's common sense, but using a visual, very powerful. Your parents quickly understand, they start understanding things more objectively than turning it into a subjective argument with you. Not just parents. If you are there from an NGO, if you're coming from a space where you're working with government agencies, if you're looking at third-party people who are looking at your information, a lot of times when you share things in anecdotes, it is challenged, it's debated. There is a quote which says, if we have data, let's look at data. If all we have is opinions, let's go with mine. Nowhere is it more true than schools. That most school people are told that you will take my opinion depending on the hierarchy as such. It comes from a CRP, BRP, it can come from different places as such. While teachers and school leaders have so much of context, a lot of times in the absence of data, in the absence of just showing something with the idea of just context and anecdotes, we end up losing out on how do we communicate. In this case, a lot of parental engagement changes once they're able to look at data as such. Okay. Just an example. Right now, I'm just showing you a few examples of things, but the possibility is really high. Okay. And right now, we just spoke about just assessments, long-term goals, attendances, parental information. Once you start looking at what is possible with little tools, you will be able to easily find yourself working with behaviors, understanding socio-emotional learning. How do you put certain rubrics around it? How do you collect this information? Once again, not because somebody from outside is going to define what those rubrics are, but you find what you're trying to chase here. And the tool will do the harder parts for you in terms of how do you collect it? How do you put the structure around it? So again, the session was all about just knowing that by the virtue of tools, we're able to build a whole bunch of small decisions, right? What we also do is, so how do we get there? Again, this seems a lot, but just keep it simple. There's something called the data dance that I'm calling. We just want to look at this as start small, start with simple things. Don't worry, while I've shown you a whole bunch, I've shown you girls' attendance, I've shown you start with simple things that I showed you in that grade 4. If you're able to create a small visual to the numbers, you'll start making connections to it. If you're making a connection, you will have a hypothesis that says, I'm going to try and figure out why this particular thing is happening. So start small, hypothesis, one goal. Even if you have one goal for the next 2 weeks, so be it. Avoid looking at all the data at once. A school is too heavy with data. You'll get there. You don't need to rush through, but avoid looking all of them at once. Choose one of them as such, right? And then just start reading that data. Whatever you see in that data set, start reading what shows up. It's always that the data is talking to you. Most of this data is generally communicating back to you. Once you are able to figure out those pieces, set a process to it. You've done 3 or 4 little things, put a process that it's becoming a recurring practice. Finally, just make sure that you're able to learn one tool. I would always suggest as educators, learn one data tool. All of you are in the middle of a lot of data. Make it easier for you. Trust me, once you learn a data tool, the world will become easy for you. You'll feel that you're able to just pass through any information in front of you and make sense out of it. Finally, again, automate, visualize. Once you're able to understand the basics, you're able to automate certain processes. So ma'am, as you mentioned, Power BI is a great tool. Power BI allows you to do automate and visualize. But the first 5 bits, it's easier to do with a smaller tool like Excel. Just, everyday tinkering of information, saying what new is coming up. When I create a student segment like this, what am I able to see out of it? Once you're able to do this, you're good. It's like a dance. You go on to the next one. You start picking up the next step and work with it. Right? With that, I think we are more or less, the idea of the webinar was to show you what's possible with data. The idea of once you have data that's available to you, which schools abundantly have, then of course there's a whole bunch of things that we do. Rather, if you're interested, we also do larger webinars, which basically not just webinars, but teacher workshops, where we have a 6-day schedule, where we walk through simplifying data practices like what we did on day 1, what we did today. We do a little more activities, but you start getting more used to the tools as such. On day 2, we actually get into talking about formal data frameworks. There are certain 4 broad frameworks that we talk about in terms of saying, how do you understand deconstructing data? How do you understand what is making your data up? Or how do you find trends and patterns? We talk about certain very common mistakes that people make in schools as such, very common mistakes that we've seen so many educators make in data collection that they're doing, or looking at those averages without the context. I'll probably pick up an example right here if I have time. But introduction to segments. On day 3, we start thinking about, if I know how I can actually gradify things, how do I think of assessments backwards? Day 4 gets into active decision making. Day 5, day 6, we start getting into qualitative assessments. By day 6, you're actually looking at correlations between, say, student activities and actions around how their performances are, what are the other pieces that you go with it. And again, if you're interested, we can definitely, that's something that we do. Usually, this is generally giving you an expected outcome where you start personalizing information. You have a tool mastery as such. You're able to optimize your efforts, where you minimize your work on operations and make smarter decisions. This room was, again, we had so many instances where just looking at certain lines, we're able to come up with ideas as such. You're able to build these little decisions. Importantly, you start communicating. You communicate to peers, you communicate to your parents, leaders. Importantly, as data comes back to you, you're able to demand better. When your MIS people come in, you're able to ask them for something better. You're asking for trainings that's coming out of your classroom's own data that says, this is where I think I need a little support of them. And finally, of course, create your research papers, journals. Your teachers, as teachers, we hold so much of wealth of information. The only thing that's holding us back from sharing outside is the volume of things that we are working with. But creating small research, small papers, small journals, small best practices, all of this becomes easy because you're just reflecting through your information as such. Okay? And that's more or less what we had for today. Just the idea of giving you a glimpse of what's possible with data. Right? I'm happy to take more questions. I'm happy to have some ideas from the room if anybody's got anything for me. Rutuja, you wanted me to go back to the last slide. Which slide do you want me to go back to, Rutuja? What do you have in the slide? Yeah, okay. Sharp lady, there you go. So all I've done here is just said, start small, hypothesize. Avoid looking at all of it at once. Just read your data. Very simple things. Right? And that's more or less what we had for today. Over our sessions, if anybody wants to be a part of the sessions, we actually walk you through a whole process of things. Then how do you start thinking with data? For us, most teachers who've been able to go through the program start understanding what is the power that's lying in your own information. Hello? Sorry. Yes. There is somebody who's got a background music going on. If I can request you to go on mute, please. Ms. Sudha, actually, we do a program ourselves. We actually run a program where it's not just about data tools. So to us, when you're learning tools as such, we are actually going through the whole process of mastering the tool, knowing what is it that we are trying to do with the tool. So while you learn in Excel, the learning will be easily transferable to something like, say, SQL, Python, or Power BI, technical things, but your idea of what you're trying to chase becomes much easier. Again, the idea of the tool, again, is to communicate what is coming out of it. So I'm most happy to send the information of what we do. Most happy to share that information. Rather, Firki, as a group, will also be doing this with you. Right? We'll be sending those details as such. But that's what we do. We basically work with teachers. We do school workshops. We help schools understand that you already have MIS and processes. How do we build these little practices at a classroom that makes your teachers work a lot more efficiently for themselves? Their lesson planning gets easier. Their classroom, observations gets easier. You're able to work with your peers a lot more. Just that, right? And also, as an organization, we also partner with a few other organizations to loosely collaborate with people. Again, we talk of data, financial literacy, career coaching, media journalism as some of the real 21st century skills we're talking about. When you talk of the 4 C's, I'm sure that they've existed since century 1, that we've had collaboration, the whole idea of creative thinking and whatnot. But again, we do this little activity, these work with also a bunch of organizations loosely connected. So personally, we also do programs of students. We upskill students on data upskilling, again, Excel, data, the idea of working with things. We do a whole bunch of activities for them that include sustainability, climate change. We do a bunch of things. But this workshop was, again, specifically talk about how teachers can actually engage the data better. And finally, while you're here, please do take a few minutes to also see the Firki platform. I think a lot of us have used. Let me just zoom out with the idea. We started off with a cup of tea. I'm going to close out with another quick activity here. If you notice right now, I just have 2 pieces of information here. There's something that says there's a photo of paneer kofta, which is a dish right here. There's one of a pasta. Each of you can, anybody who finds it comfortable to choose one. If you notice the kofta is given to you, the ingredients are given to you. Does it seem like what the ingredients need to be? Anyone who sees an anomaly, anyone who sees something that seems to be in place or not? It says paneer kofta has cottage cheese, potato, bananas, oranges are misplaced. Okay. Where do you find bananas and oranges? In the paneer kofta. If you look at, say, your pasta, that again has something that says yeast. It says yogurt, it says apple. Ideally, again, this is just another example of saying a lot of times when you look at a dish, a classroom, we look at a classroom as that final dish. A lot of things that we look at a student is basically from that lens of that overall growth. But data is nothing but just keeping these ingredients stacked up. You just have the ingredients noted somewhere. Look at how many people are quickly able to find what is not in place. That's all you're working with data is. On top of it, a whole bunch of things can happen. But the basics are the same, that if you just have it in front of you, they're able to pick that qualitative information, put some quantify into it, it starts making a lot more sense. Okay. Thank you so much. This is all there. I'm happy for some questions as well. Anybody who's got questions, I'm happy to stay back. Also, take a minute to please go through the Firki portal. There's an amazing portal out here. It has a whole bunch of trainings available to you. There's a dashboard given to you. If you look at this, there are multiple trainings that go from pre-service teachers to in-education teachers, school leaders and coaches programs. There are webinars that's coming up. A lot of resources are available. If you look at them, they have Khan Academy resources that are available for you to just have some services going in. for your students, for your classrooms. Take a minute to go through that as well. And finally, of course, I'm just going to use this minute to also talk about Mr. Rupin Chadda, who's somebody whom I've known. He's a STEM educator for the last 18 years of experience. Anybody who's looking for a STEM educator, brilliant educator, Mr. Rupin Chadda. I worked with him in past. I've known students who bunk classes to leave out somewhere. I've known students who bunk other things to go attend his class. He's openly looking for opportunities. Please do reach out to him. The numbers and the details are given to you. And thank you. I'm happy to take some questions, but otherwise, most happy to get your feedback. Know if you're more interested in doing this. Happy to know it.
Thank you so much, Prasanna. It's a wonderful space, lot of things to learn, even though visually, right?